November 7th, 1990. It's just after 7 p.m. in downtown Montreal, Canada. A guest is enjoying an evening swim in the rooftop pool at the Bonaventure Hotel, when suddenly she looks up into the sky and sees this. Look closely. 4 strange glowing green lights seem to point outward from the center like spokes, while 2 bright yellow lights can clearly be seen in the center of the object. The woman notifies management, and soon a group of people, including the police, come to the hotel rooftop. As the crowd gathers, initial estimates among witnesses place the lights at least 1,000 feet above the hotel. Journalist MJ Banias explains why this event is famous not only in Canadian history, but UFO lore.
The Bonaventure UFO incident was very unique because almost 30 people saw this strange object in the sky hovering above this hotel. And more bizarrely, this hovers above this hotel for 2 or 3 hours, and you would assume people in the city would see it. But the only people who were able to see this were the people on the roof of the hotel or on the sidewalk just outside it when they looked up.
Additionally, no aircraft was identified in that location by military or commercial radar. So what happened, and why this specific hotel?
2 UFO researchers were able to comprise a report quite quickly after the encounter, and they were able to collect significant witness testimony.
The witnesses all described to investigators a craft that matches what's seen in the photograph. But most intriguing is after the craft disappears, one witness later that night sees a boomerang-shaped object hovering over the Hydro-Quebec Long Point power station. Is it the same craft that hovered over the hotel?
This story has everything. And when you get a whole bunch of people telling the same story, it's going to automatically draw a lot of attention.
Montreal's Hotel Bonaventure is nestled on the top 2 floors of the sprawling 17-story Place Bonaventure. When it first opened in 1967, it was the world's largest commercial building at 3.1 million square feet, more than the Empire State Building. So perhaps the reason the alleged UFO in 1990 selected the Hotel Bonaventure was its size. But is it even a UFO? We asked our experts to take a look. We start with aviation expert Tim McMillan.
Basing it on the image here, possibly a helicopter that has a searchlight or some type of bright lights attached to it, but you would be able to see the warning lights that are on helicopters. Also, you can hear helicopters from miles away. They're loud, especially one that is hovering for 3 hours. That's a long time. But none of the eyewitnesses mentioned hearing a helicopter. So we could be looking at a drone, but this photograph was taken in 1990. The military-level drone technology was still in its infancy. And frankly, if we were looking at military testing drone technology, you don't do that over civilian populated areas.
In fact, McMillan believes if it's a flying machine, it's not one we know of.
We're able to rule out fixed-wing planes because they can't hover. I don't know of any good aerospace platform that would be able to fit both what we're seeing in the picture and what eyewitnesses said.
Is it possible location plays a factor? Meteorologist Juan Hernandez notes that Canada is well known for one of the most spectacular natural phenomena on Earth.
My initial thought was, could it be the aurora borealis? But aurora borealis often move and are quite transient. In this case, the report was a stationary light that lasted for several hours.
But the hazy nature of the photo does lead Hernandez to investigate if Mother Nature could still be playing a role.
I was able to track down the weather observations from that day. We do have temperatures that were actually about 30 to 34 degrees while this was occurring, but the relative humidity itself was somewhat on the high side. So whenever you have something like this, you oftentimes develop either some sort of fog or low clouds.
For astronomer and video effects designer Mark D'Antonio, that may be the key to solving this mystery.
I believe that we're seeing a reflection back from the clouds, the fog, that look like something else. You've seen this every time you go out in your car and you drive along on a foggy night. So these lights could have been lights from the pool and from some other lighting around the Bonaventure Hotel, reflecting up into the sky and then down to the pool again.
It's a plausible theory, but if it was the reflected pool light, wouldn't the guests and police there that night have put 2 and 2 together? Plus, consider this. It's been 30 years. There have been many foggy nights in Montreal in that time, and if it's a reflection, it's one that's never been seen again.
Whenever you're trying to form a really good investigation, you're testing different hypotheses, but I'm inclined to believe that multiple, potentially up to 80 witnesses, someone would have been able to determine if it was a light being reflected categorically, based on the image and what the eyewitnesses said, it is a UFO.
Our verdict? We're going with genuine UFO. As McMillan says, while there are plausible theories, in our view, we still don't have a smoking gun. The Hotel Bonaventure incident is still considered one of the most famous UFO sightings in Canada. So much so that in 2020, it was depicted on a $20 silver glow-in-the-dark coin. September 2018, Saskatchewan, Canada. A local fishing guide is going about a normal day in his lodge when he spies something strange out his window. Something dark and hairy is huddled on the ground amongst the trees. At first, it looks like a small bear, and then it stands and nearly triples in height. It's a huge wolf, and we only understand its scale when it lunges at the regular-sized dog who's defensively barking. The animals quarrel until the man goes to intervene. Hey! Let's see that again.
This large shape suddenly becomes animated and springs up and charges at the dog. And much to my shock and horror, it appears to be a wolf of mind-boggling proportions. It's truly monstrous.
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt tells us of the giant wolf's prominent stature in folklore.
There have long been legends of monstrous, bloodthirsty wolves. In France, we have the beast of Gévaudan. In Alaska, there's something known as the Amarok, or demon wolf. And nearby in the Nahanni Valley of Canada, we have something known as the Wahila. The Nahanni Valley is also known as the Headless Valley because the decapitated bodies of prospectors and trappers have been found there and have been linked to the legend of this giant wolf-like Wahila. So we have these long enduring traditions of giant wolves, and we have to wonder if there might be a grain of truth to this legend.
Some have speculated that this wolf might be more familiar than we think, a creature not from the realm of legend, but from our own prehistory.
The largest gray wolves, Canis lupus, have been known to achieve weights of about 200 pounds. But if we go back over 10,000 years ago to the Pleistocene epoch, there were these monstrous bone-crushing wolves known as dire wolves, Canis dirus. A relic population of dire wolves may have survived as recently as 4,000 years ago in Arkansas's Ozarks. We could be dealing with a dire wolf genetic code that's been locked into modern wolves and is now resurfacing in this remarkable individual.
An interesting note about that French beast of Gévaudan. Though that monster wolf lived on and kept killing after being driven off by a young boy, that kid was rewarded for his bravery. King Louis XV paid for his education. Now let's get the educated opinion on this specimen. Could there be something off about this wolf's genetics? Some sort of mutation? There is a phenomenon called an atavism, where a creature has traits from its ancestors preserved in its genes. However, it's unlikely in this case, as atavisms aren't likely to manifest in the form of a canine size. An extra toe is more likely. Then what's going on here? Wildlife biologist Stephanie Shuttler isn't crying wolf, she's crying hoax.
To me, it didn't look like the dog was in danger. That was really suspicious. So that's what makes me think that it was CGI.
When someone suspects a fake, we call in Michael Primo, our forensic video analyst.
It's my conclusion that there is no additional information that was introduced into these recordings that would be similar to something that was CGI'd or manufactured.
With the clip appearing to be legitimate, biologist Floyd Hayes discusses the creature's resemblance to the dire wolf.
The dire wolf is a little bit larger than a wolf with a larger head and smaller feet.
What's more, the dire wolf had shorter, stockier legs to keep them warmer during the cold winter months. The wolf we see here is proportioned much more similarly to our modern-day canine. So with all other possibilities unlikely, Hayes says it's just a gray wolf. But there's a surprise. He did a size calculation and found this specimen to be one of the largest wolves ever documented. Hayes says the dog looks like a type of husky, which tend to grow a little over 2 feet tall and around 60 pounds. And the wolf looks about 1.5 times larger than the dog here. Hayes guesses this wolf is about 3 feet tall and 6.5 feet from end to end. That's longer than most men are tall. And what's more, it's nearly a record. Compared to the largest wolf ever recorded, Hayes thinks this is only half an inch shorter. So this wolf is truly a gargantuan. Incredible. Our verdict, an actual wolf who just happens to be quite large for his species. This is not a supernatural creature, but he is an outlier. How he got that big is still a mystery. But we know he's a loner who probably branched off to form his own pack. October 16th, 2018. A hiker is winding his way through a dense forest in Sacré-Coeur, Canada, when his trek through the woods takes a shocking turn. So he takes out his camera and records this. The land begins shaking before him. The ground seems to inflate and then deflate. It's almost as if the earth is breathing. So could the forest be alive? According to journalist Erin McCarthy, one theory suggests it just may be.
The theory is that this is all possible through mycorrhizal networks, which are essentially fungal filaments that link up with the tree roots in a symbiotic relationship. Say, for example, there's a plant over here that's being eaten by insects. It will emit chemicals called volatile organic compounds that will actually warn nearby plants that it is being attacked. And then those plants will also emit their own chemical that makes them not so palatable to any insects.
Could that mycorrhizal network warning system be so powerful that it would cause the ground to suddenly move? Or are we looking at a different kind of phenomenon? McCarthy says another kind of mysterious force may be at work. It's a phenomenon known as a fairy trap. Researchers have documented multiple reports nearby from the island of Newfoundland, Canada. The idea was travelers on long journeys would leave gifts and offerings to fairies for good weather or safe passage, but those who did not could be tricked and trapped.
Some areas of the Canadian wilderness are said to be fairy hotspots. According to one tale, there was a man who was wandering through the forest who encountered a stand of trees that he had never seen on that path before. This obviously freaked him out quite a bit, and so he walked the path back and forth about 3 times. And on the 3rd time, the trees disappeared and everything was back to normal. Could we possibly be looking at a fairy trap here?
So what do we have here? Trees communicating and reacting to an oncoming threat? Fairies at work? It's estimated Canada is home to almost 318 billion trees, which represents 30% of the whole world's forests. But what do our experts think we have here? Let's make sure they don't miss the forest for the trees. First, we talked to meteorologist Juan Hernandez. With the ground moving so violently, is the answer obvious? Could this be some kind of earthquake?
Seismographs are located everywhere across the globe. And if it was an earthquake, we would have seen a jolt in the seismograph, at least a couple of waves. We did not pick that up from here.
So it may not be a quake, but Hernandez is convinced that Mother Nature is definitely playing a role.
If we look at the wind gusts that specific day on October 16th, they were approaching 61 miles an hour. Now, you would expect a significant amount of movement in the trees. Taking a look at the entire month, this was the windiest day.
Okay, so high winds might obviously sway trees, but actually move the earth like that? We don't even see that during a hurricane. But what about the idea the trees are communicating? Could the trees be connected as part of a wood wide web? Sending signals and speaking to each other through the mycorrhizal network? NASA geologist Bob Anderson can't say for sure. Instead, he sees clues in the video to explain what's happening. Check out the moss.
Well, the first thing you can notice in this area is these big boulders. These boulders are laying all over the place, which tells me that those boulders are also under the ground. And so there's not a lot of soil under there. My second clue is this green that you see here. It's a layer of moss that grows all around it.
While the moss may look like solid ground, it's in fact more like a doormat covering the rocks and very thin.
So what you have here is a rocky type of soil with a tree on top with roots that are very weak, and it covered with the moss. That's a very unstable tree system.
So both Anderson and Hernandez say it's ultimately a combination of factors led by the weather, a strong, heavy wind getting under a loosely connected layer of moss and earth.
It's probably what we call a microburst, where you get a tremendous amount of air driven down to the ground. It's literally pulling up that layer of moss with its roots, causing trees to move.
And making it look like something breathing.
Our verdict, we're going with loose soil and strong winds. We think Anderson's analysis of mossy topsoil, coupled with a possible microburst that day, are ultimately responsible. But while these trees are not necessarily breathing, so to speak, they do help humans too. On average, one tree produces nearly 260 pounds of oxygen each year. 2 mature trees can provide enough for a family of 4. May 2021. Canadian resident Rob connects with Chris from Utah on a video chat. The two met on a Facebook group that explores the idea of possible extrasensory powers. Chris claims to have one particularly shocking ability.
There you go.
With a piece of foil on one finger, Chris holds up a light bulb and presses the end, and suddenly is able to make it light up without any wires.
Turn it all around everywhere so people can see there's nothing anywhere. Perfect.
The two got together to talk to us.
I was skeptical.
I got him to take his camera and show it all around because I was wondering if there was some kind of a static generator or a Tesla coil, but there wasn't.
Chris says this extraordinary ability was taught to him by a man in South America who honed this power through years of meditation.
We're like a capacitor or a battery. That's what my teacher taught me. All I'm doing is I'm gathering an abundance of negative ions from the atmosphere and charging my body with it. So I create a voltage differential. And so what you're seeing most of it is static discharge.
Now, does that hurt, Chris?
Oh, it drains.
It's physical exercises like moving his muscles in a certain way, breathing a certain way, and it creates a charge. It pulls negative ions out of the air. So the negative ions in his body are going through the bulb, lighting it up, and then they pass on their way to ground and discharge to the ground. You know, it's really just about physics.
Now, the average human produces about 100 watts of electricity at rest, but we generally lack the ability to focus that energy into a consistent current. So how is Chris able to do this? Let's ask the experts. So, of course, our first question, is this just a clever trick? Mick West thinks the answer is yes.
He's actually got a little bit of foil on the end of one finger. If you look at a regular light bulb, you see it's got one contact in the middle and then the other contact where the screws are. And electricity normally flows across those. But if you stick a battery and a small bulb inside the light bulb, you can actually create a trick light bulb that will light up when touching a bit of aluminum foil to the two contacts. And I think that's all that's going on here.
But maybe that's not how the trick's done.
Wow.
Dr. Hakeem Olushehi says it may be possible he's not collecting ions from the air, but that he's conducting the electricity coming from somewhere else.
Our bodies are 50% water, and the water in our bodies is a pretty good conductor of electricity. The body can hold a voltage if he's directly connected to a source of power, and he can transfer that voltage to the bulb, causing it to illuminate.
It's not out of the question, then, that Chris is hoaxing us by hooking himself up to a low-voltage current.
Contact, yeah.
But even a small sustained amount could have damaging effects.
A current going through your body, particularly if it goes through the heart, it'll upset the heart's rhythms. So the first question may be, how are they surviving this?
Ow!
When we talked to Chris and Rob, they insisted no wires or trick bulbs were involved, and even demonstrated this power in a new way.
Let me hold your hand, okay? And I'm gonna take the bulb and I'm gonna touch it to the ground of the table. There it is. There we go. If you look around the table, there's nothing attached to the table. There's nothing attached to Chris. It's not a trick light bulb. I can't make it go on by touching it. No way, no how. But if I grab his hand, then I can do it. Ow!
Our experts were pretty convinced this was a hoax, but even though we weren't with Chris and Rob in person, their demonstration was pretty convincing. Since we can't explain how he's doing it, we're gonna call this an unexplained trick.